Good afternoon. It's been said that if you aren't in danger of missing your flight, you are getting to the airport way too early. I'm guessing some of you have some feelings about that, and don't worry, this is not a talk about travel advice. I started public speaking through a program called Toastmasters, and one of the things they tell you is to open up your talk with something that's going to make people have feelings, and so that's what this was. Toastmasters is also the genesis of this talk, the power of no. If I'd known then what we were going to discuss today, this talk probably wouldn't exist, but we'll come back to that in a bit. I do see a couple of familiar faces, shook hands with a couple of people I know. For those of you that have seen this talk before, thanks for coming back. This is the director's cut now with 8% more slides. Places you can find me, I'm on LinkedIn at Harmon Jr. One of my pastimes is to watch movies. I like to post the ratings and reviews to an app called Letterboxd. I get into amateur photography. I use an app called Glass if you're interested or curious to see that. I also still use the Deadbird app, or the app formerly known as Twitter. If you want to listen to basketball or movie takes or see divisive opinions posted like this. Sorry to all my bonus fans. A little about me. I am a father, husband, cyclist, software developer, and champion of tough conversations. If you need someone to tell you to get your stuff together, I'm your guy. I'm also the master of making others feel old. I personally feel old all the time. My wife and I have 2 teenage daughters, one who just finished her freshman year at OSU, and one who is going to be a senior in high school. Some of you who've been to my previous talks probably know how this is going to go. I open up, I show this graphic of The Lion King. I normally would ask for a show of hands how many people remember seeing this in theaters the first time. Then I'd talk about how they had this unfortunate remake that came out 25 years later. Sorry, Beyonce. Right now, people are like, okay, well, that's knowledge, but what do we do with that? We take that same 25 years and go backwards. We actually land at the moon landing. And now if you're feeling uncomfortable about why we're talking about the moon landing, you should, because I wanted to point out that that event that you remembered going to on the timeline is closer to the moon landing than it is to today. I've used that joke in quite a few talks, and I can't entirely give up that bit yet. And since today is the 25th anniversary of the Star Wars Episode 1 re-release, I felt it was inappropriate to pass it up without saying something. So how many of you that are Star Wars fans remember seeing this in theaters the first time? Got quite a few hands, okay. For those that didn't raise their hands, they're either not Star Wars fans, or, which is legit, or they've never known a world without this guy. On a closing note for this bit, there are some of you, and I met a few last night, that remembered seeing the original Star Wars in theaters, not the re-release in 97, but the one in 1977. I'm not going to make you identify yourselves, but I wanted to point out that we are rapidly approaching the 50th year anniversary of the original. And if you don't feel old now, I can't do anything else for that. I have one more thing to dive into before we get started. Hopefully you had a chance to join the Star Trek Discord. If not, the link is on the banner. They have the sessions broken out by the time slot. If you go to the 1300 sessions, just the power of no, feel free to post questions or comments in there, especially if you're in the satellite room, and we'll make sure we cover those at the end. If you have any questions during this, feel free to raise your hand and jump in at any point in time. We can make this a discussion. So this gets into why the power of no. We're at a tech conference, and so this seems like the perfect audience to understand what I perceive to be the 5 hardest problems that we encounter. Saying no, obviously, that's why we're here. Naming things, Sometimes it has felt like once you know what to call something, the rest of the problem becomes super clear, but you have to spend an inordinate amount of time coming up with a name. Caching, where to bust cache, when should this expire, is it stale, and off by one errors. Have you ever been in a situation where you know you should say no, but you couldn't? I'm going to ask you to put a hand up. I'm going to have you put a finger down for each one of these following questions. Have you ever attended a meeting that you wish you hadn't? Have you ever been happy that plans were canceled because you never really wanted to go in the first place? Do you have goals of reading or writing or picking up a new hobby that you just can't seem to find time for? Do you have trouble getting to sleep at night, either laying awake thinking about all the things that you still have to do or all the things you didn't get to? If any of those resonated with you, or you feel seen or attacked right now, don't. This is a safe place. And know that you're actually not alone if you look around. If you still have all your fingers up, we should talk after this, and maybe you can give this talk next time. These days, the lines between work and home have become blurry at best. Knowing how to say no is more important than it's ever been. This talk is going to be about using this 2-letter word, no, to firmly establish boundaries and to protect your time, values, and the people you care about. This talk is going to be broken into the following 5 sections: the power of no, why we can't seem to say no, all the reasons why we need to get better at saying no, evaluating if we should be saying no, and finally, how to go about doing that. And as you can tell, I have fixed my off by one error. When we were younger, we learned the word no really early on, and we probably used it quite liberally. No, I don't want to eat that. No, I don't want to take a nap. No, I don't want to share. Some of us have kids and have gone through this, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. Hell hath no fury like a toddler who doesn't want to do something. But when do we give up the power to try to establish our own boundaries? There are a few things I'm going to say today that may make you a little uncomfortable. And the first which is, if you say yes all the time, your yes has no meaning and it has no power. You ever have someone assume that you are just going to do something for them? Like maybe give them a ride or cover the difference for lunch. Have a boss assume that you're going to stay late to finish a project. Because they could count on you saying yes, it eventually led to that becoming the assumption or the default, and that leads to exploitation. To illustrate this analogy, think of a water-soaked sponge. Every yes squeezes more water out of that sponge. And typically, people will take a water-soaked sponge and continue squeezing it until there's no more water to come out of it. That's what they will do, or that's what happens if you always say yes. I'm going to say a second thing that may make you feel a little bit more uncomfortable. You cannot say yes to everything and actually stand for something. We're in a room full of people who like to solve problems, and we like to say yes and agree to things. One of my favorite lines from Hamilton the musical is, Hamilton asked Burr, if you stand for nothing, what will you fall for? Those questions I asked you at the beginning, have you ever attended a meeting that you wish you hadn't? Have you ever been happy that plans were canceled because you never really wanted to go? Goals around reading or new hobbies, having trouble sleeping at night, laying awake. When you find yourselves in those situations, you have fallen for the trap of not protecting your time or yourself. Every yes is a no to something else. I'm going to repeat that one more time, but every yes is a no to something else. We have a finite amount of time and energy. A yes is a debit from that time and energy source. We'll do another show of hands. But how many of you have plans to go work out after work? How many of you have had those plans and then not fulfilled them? It's not because you're lazy or you don't care. It's because you've already burned through all of your energy source at that time. The same principle applies here. Every yes to something that you don't really want to do is a no to something that you do want to do. There's an article in Psychology Today. It says, no is a moment of clear choice. It announces, however indirectly, something affirmative about you. Imagine declining to sign a petition. You're not going to sign that. You've affirmed something about yourself. Maybe it's not your truth, doesn't speak to your beliefs. Imagine saying no that you won't join a committee or an extra project or help with someone's kids. And you're saying that because you want to spend more time doing on your own important project. You've affirmed, this is how I want to spend my time. Imagine saying, count me out, because I'm not comfortable or not in agreement or not on the bandwagon of the thing we want to do. You can imagine saying, no, thank you. You might feel like you might hurt somebody if you turn down the invitation, but my needs take priority. No is that clear choice. No is both the tool and the barrier by which we establish and maintain the distinct perimeter of the self. No says, this is who I am, this is what I value, and this is what I will and will not do, and this is how I will choose to act. No allows us to recognize that we have limits, time, money, and capacity. And in order to maintain those limits, we must become very comfortable with using the word no. This two-letter word is powerful and can help you establish honest, healthy boundaries and allow you to take care of yourself. So now we've talked about the power of no. A natural follow-up question might be, well, why can't we say no? We'll get this one out of the way right at the top. It's because it's hard. There'd be very little for me to talk with you about today if we could just say no and it was easy. But perhaps the better question is, why is it hard? For starters, we may find we have difficulty saying no because it feels negative. Whether it's a reasonable no, like, I'm sorry I don't have money to lend you, or a thoughtful no, like, I appreciate you making dessert, but I don't have room for it, or a firmly asserted no, thanks for the invite, but I already have plans for the weekends. We fear that the receiver will only hear no and often feel bad that it's negative. We struggle to say no because we also fear the consequences. How do you say no to overtime or no to a chance to pick up a new project without feeling like you're either letting somebody down or you won't get that opportunity again? We often struggle to say no because we don't have a deeper yes. To discover our deeper yes, we must discover that why we're saying no in the first place. Oftentimes we say no, it tends to be reactively, out of an attack, an accommodation, or an avoidance. This type of no stems from fear, hurt, or anger. But if our no comes from someplace more proactive, forward-looking, purposeful, it will give us the space to not feel like we're on the defense. We often don't stop to think about what we really want and why, and we'll default to a yes. Lastly, you might fear missing out, or FOMO that I think the kids might still call it. But are those reasons really worth your peace of mind? There is probably a nice overlap between those that put their fingers down earlier when asked if they were ever happy when plans were canceled, and those that agreed to go to those plans for fear of missing out. It is possible you never really want to do whatever the plan was to begin with. Because saying no is hard, we often will attempt to avoid and accommodate, which is how resentment grows. It's easy to get pulled into situations we'd rather avoid to ignore, or to ignore than worry about our own well-being, and that never ends well. To come back to the Toastmaster story from earlier, This group met every other week. I would take an hour. I would go sit with them. They would teach us things about presentations. At the end of one of these meetings, one of the leaders asked me, do you want to do a talk next week or the next meeting? It's a lightning talk. It's 5 to 7 minutes. I knew at that moment, in that second, that I did not want to do that, and I still said yes. Fast forward 2 weeks, I still don't have a talk ready. And I'm in the shower that morning, and it hit me that I really should have just said no. And that is the genesis of this talk. And because all of my best ideas come in the shower, we're all sitting here together now. In the end, this worked out. I have a talk to show for it. I enjoy getting to talk about the subject. But there were still several stressful days and hours leading up to that talk that I could have avoided, and that I wish I hadn't had to suffer through. So why did I tell you this story? Because I wanted to illustrate that saying no gives you power. I could have done something else, literally anything else, with that time that I was spent being stressed out. We have to get better at saying no. And one of the reasons why we have to get better at saying no is because anybody can say yes. If you put your fingers down earlier, you already know this. But no gives you the power in an exchange. There's a book called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. This book is about a former FBI hostage negotiator. One of the things that he talks about in the beginning of the negotiations, he would lob up these questions that the offender would never say yes to. It would have them establish agency or power in the negotiation. They were easy no's, but allowed the offender to feel like they had some power going forward. We could get into a whole other discussion about the power dynamics there, but the takeaway here is that using no allows us to keep the power in a conversation and allows us to protect our boundaries and allows us to protect ourselves. There are some benefits to saying no. Time to do whatever else we've been putting off. Power to be more in control of our lives. The more we use it, the easier it's going to be to use it. It keep from overextending ourselves, fighting fatigue, or fighting burnout for all the wrong reasons. And lastly, we might discover something new that we like to do because we freed up the time and space to explore that possibility. Saying no typically feels awkward at first and definitely takes practice, but the more you use it and the more you do it, the easier it's going to get. Now, we know there are times that we should be saying no, and some of those benefits of why we should say no, but now we need to know the 5 situations of how, or should I say it. We should know to say no when it doesn't align with our values. Do I truly want to do this? What do I gain out of doing this task or attending this function or going to this commitment? Saying no protects you from exploitation. What has this person done for me lately? Terse, but some relationships are far more one-sided than you realize if you always say yes. As an aside for this, it is truly remarkable how many people will ask and sometimes even demand of you things that they wouldn't even ask of themselves. I bring back the sponge analogy from earlier. People will continue to squeeze as long as you continue to say yes. We should say no when it keeps us focused on our own goals. Remember towards the beginning when I asked the question, does anybody have goals of reading, writing, or picking up a new hobby that they can't seem to find time for? What else could you do with this time if you said no to whatever the ask was? You should be saying no to being treated poorly by others. This is different from exploitation. Exploitation, for the purposes of this talk, is when the value you have to the other party is solely based on what you can do for them, nothing more, nothing less. Being treated poorly is the other side of the same coin. But in this instance, you are accepting being treated poorly for fear of losing that person. I would classify this one as anything that you're saying yes to that makes you question your worth. Last instance we should evaluate when deciding to say if we should say no is so many of us would rather be right than happy. We made a choice and we should stick to it, or so we think. But what happens if you're on the wrong course and you're aware of it? Maybe you work someplace that others might think of as a dream job, but makes you sick to your stomach the night before. Maybe you're in a relationship or friendship that you already know is over. Evaluate whether or not saying no would help you change course. Which brings us to, if only it was this easy. Now, we talked about all the reasons you might not be saying no enough. We've talked about how to evaluate whether or not to say no, but we really haven't talked about perhaps the most helpful piece of advice I can give you, which is how to say no. Here are a couple of tips I'm going to give you for that. Number one, you're going to give yourself a cushion. Because you will be caught off guard sometimes, and because getting good at saying no is a new muscle that we're going to be working to strengthen, we want to give ourselves some space. If you're feeling nervous or flustered and a nice squishy yes seems like it would get you out of the situation, I want you to think about whipping out a phrase such as, I can't decide right now, or let me think about it, or even let me check my schedule and get back to you. Instead of expecting yourself to be the master of no right out of the gate, keep phrases like this at the ready to give yourself time to pause so you can break the habit of agreeing to stuff immediately in order to escape your discomfort. Number two, we're going to be quick. Tell the person you can't do it early after the offer, after you've made a decision that the answer is going to be no. Don't hesitate on it. There can be this feeling of guilt if you let an invite or request linger and feel more compelled to say yes because we've given it so much space since the initial request that we feel like we've eaten up too much of their time. They asked me 2 weeks ago and I didn't, so now I feel like I should say yes for taking this time. Get it out of the way early. Once you know you need to say no and keep moving. Be honest. Explain that you have other commitments, or if it's something that you don't really want to do, you can say that too. You can tell people that you appreciate the invite, but it's not something you want to do. Sometimes there will be a need to compromise with your no, but you can't successfully do that if you're not being honest. You can suggest an alternative. Name another person who might be able to help them with their task, or name another place that you like to go. Sometimes somebody will suggest a food option do you want, and you can name another alternative as an example. This will feel very similar to making a compromise. Lastly, ask for a rain check. If it's something you really want to do, but maybe you can't fit it into your schedule, ask for a rain check. Making another plan for the future allows you to still show good faith that you want to do it, if that's the concern, while also saying no and protecting your time for that immediate ask. There's this book from Jensen Cyril called Badass Habits, and a quote from it says, "Getting your no on is all about clarity, kindness, speed, consistency, and commitment. No is a simple, short word. It's not full of long, drawn-out explanations, justifications, apologies, emotions, excuses, or backpedaling." Here are some general rules for how to say a really good no. Make your no all about you. Example, let's say we have a friend or a family member whose preferred form of communication is to talk on the phone, and that is not yours. Instead of telling them, I don't want to talk to you on the phone because that's the only way you like to communicate, or this goes on for too long, you can make it about you and say things of the sort like, I have some time restrictions. I can only speak to you for this long if we're going to use this communication. You've made it about you and what you're doing and not about what they're doing. Keep the emotion out of it. Don't try to second guess what they're thinking or worry that they'll get upset. You're responsible for your end of the conversation only. And if they get upset, that's their work, not yours. Use direct language, such as, please call before you come over. Thanks so much for coming to my party, but I'm going to bed. To go. I'm not comfortable hugging strangers, but it's nice to meet you. And you can always use the just classic no thanks. Powerful no type phrases often begin with I need, I won't, I can't, I don't like, I'm not going to, or I'd appreciate it if. We can use no to make sure that we're keeping the right people around us. Rank the interactions with the people you hang out with several times a week or a month. Rank those interactions 1 through 10, with 10 being the best. Spend time with those that are 8 and up. If you're ranking that interaction and it's between a 5 or a 7, enjoy hanging out with that person, but maybe don't put them above the 8s and 9s and 10s in your life. If they're 5 or below, maybe actively practice saying no to those interactions because you're clearly not enjoying them. I have 8 types of no that you can use. One is no. That's it. As a complete sentence. The vague but firm, thank you for asking me, but that's not going to work for me. You can use a referral as a no. I won't be able to do this, but maybe you can ask. It's not personal. Thank you for thinking of me, but I'm not in a space to do that right now. The gracious no. I'm touched that you thought of me, and I really appreciate your enthusiasm and support, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to help you out at this time. The now is not the right time no. I would like to, but I'm unavailable until August. Could you ask me again closer to that time? The reassess no. The let me think about it and I will get back to you. And then there's the too busy no. I'm actually too busy, but here's what I can do instead. What are some ways we could put this into practice? Think of some scenarios in which you could say no right now. Are there ways to incorporate no while trying to make your summer plans? Are there other ways you said no that weren't included in today's talk that maybe we should discuss? To recap what we've covered today, we went over the power of no for giving ourselves more time and space and how we can make our yeses mean more. We went over why we can't say no, why it's hard, and that the kids might still use the phrase FOMO. We went over why we have to get better at saying no, reasserting power and balance in our lives. We went over evaluating if we should say no and using that to make sure it aligns with our values. And finally, we went over how to say no by giving ourselves a cushion, making it all about us, and using direct language. Thank you for coming. Any questions, discussion points? No? Excellent. What's the hardest no I've ever had to give? That's a good one. It's probably something involving the kids. I don't know if I have a good example, but I'm very confident it involves the kids. The question is, what if you say no and you get attacked for saying no, correct? Well, the challenge there is that there's a lot of evaluation points to come after that. Like, who is this person to you? Sometimes saying no to a boss can be very difficult and put you in a disadvantage. But if this person is, let's say, a friend or a relative, and they're attacking you for saying no, that means they're too close to you. Your boundaries have been violated at this stage. You should be able to comfortably tell somebody that this is not something you want to do or something you can't do. And they should have, if they can't respect that, that tells you that they're too close, both proximity and emotionally to you. Follow-up question, but I can barely hear you. No. Feel free to drop it in Discord if you think of it later and don't see me in the hallway, or feel free to,
What if it's a really, really unpopular no? Like you are the worst person in the room, like at that moment, you say that no. Like in a meeting, you're trying to make a decision and you're just like, nope, not doing that. You know?
Yeah, I mean, saying no, you're not saying no to be popular. You're not doing it to help other people's feelings. The thing here is about protecting your boundaries and what you can do and what you can commit to. And that is often going to be unpopular for other people. But you can only be responsible for your side of the equation.
Does that have like an inverse relationship? The more you say no, eventually people will start to respect you, so therefore your popularity goes back up, you know? So, you know what I mean?
I would say it has the inverse relationship, less to do about popularity, but people will respect your yeses more. So when you agree to do something, they'll be like, in theory, they will be more bought in because you've said yes, where maybe you normally would say no or not. But in terms of popularity, again, that's somebody else's perception of what's going on and should have less to do with why you're saying no.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I don't know if there's any other questions. There's like this huge bright light here. I can see nobody over here.
What if saying no is going to cost you?
And which way? The question is, what would happen if saying no would cost you?
Opportunities, friendships, whatnot.
Opportunities or friendships. So one of the things that we talked about was evaluating how this aligns with your values. So in order to know whether or not it's going to cost you an opportunity that you care about, you kind of have to evaluate what's important to you ahead of time or work towards that. Same with friendships. If you go back to the rating system and you're hanging out with people that are 4s and 5s, evaluate. You clearly don't want to rank them higher, so then you should probably be evaluating whether or not, or how often you're saying yes to that anyways. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but hopefully it helps.
What happens if you say no too much?
What happens if you say no too much?
How do you go the other way and say yes more?
And how do you go the other way and say yes more? Well, I think having a reason behind your yeses goes a long way. Like, first off, I don't actually believe anybody can say no too much, so I may be the wrong person to ask. But your yeses need to align with whatever your goals or values are. So you may find that your answer is always no because you are always in a situation where it doesn't align with what you're trying to do. And that should be perfectly acceptable. Hi.
I feel like, at least with one of my colleagues, by not saying no sooner, I was missing out on the opportunity for my colleagues to be gracious and understanding. Like, I worked up in my mind that, oh, they're not going to understand, like, that I can't focus on this one thing so much. And when I told them, no, I need to work on something else, they were actually very gracious by that. And so it was like a good reminder for myself, like, people can be kind and generous and gracious.
Yeah. So maybe to recap that for the satellite room, your comment was that by waiting to say no, you didn't give your coworkers an opportunity to be gracious and respond in kind, right? And that people could be react positively to that. I think those situations are true. I guess the thing that I would caution against is that at the end of the day, you still need to say no for you, regardless of what their reaction is going to be. So, like, if they're gracious, that's great. But if you are in a spot where you needed to focus on this project and you knew that all along, your no has to be no, so that you can focus on that. And if they take it poorly, you can't control that, and that shouldn't influence whether or not you're going to say no, because you know what your priorities are and what you're trying to get accomplished.
Sometimes a lot of growth can happen from saying yes to something that might be outside of your comfort zone. It could be something you didn't like on the base level but ended up being good for you. How do you keep yourself from accidentally saying no to something that might end up being good because it stretches you? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the question is what in the situations where saying yes stretched your boundaries and you found that you like new things, how do you I guess, avoid missing out on those opportunities? This goes back to your values and and your goals and what you're trying to accomplish. There are going to be things as you are growing, not to get existential, that it's always going to be outside your comfort zone, but because they align to where you want to go, then you will know that you need to say yes, even if it's uncomfortable. It's the yeses that are like, that don't align anywhere on your plan, that maybe it turns out okay, but that you're rolling the dice and taking the chance, and it's not on your plan for the things you're trying to do.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Any more questions? Awesome. Well, I will be in the hall, and I will check Discord. Thank you for coming.